Today our story is Roman Empire forever, 216 BC. The dawn that would echo across centuries began not with victory but with a trembling empire standing at the edge of uncertainty as Rome, proud and expanding, looked toward a world that refused to kneel. The year was 216 BC when the ground shook beneath the march of Hannibal, a commander whose name alone made Roman generals swallow their courage. And his Carthaginian army, scarred from crossing the Alps, stood like wolves ready to leap upon a lion too proud to notice its wounds, while the Roman legions, disciplined, gleaming in armor, confident in their numbers, marched onto the field at Cannae believing sheer size would crush brilliance, unaware that they were facing the kind of mind that rewrote warfare itself. The commanders argued, soldiers tightened their grips on shields, and the heat rose like a warning from the gods as Hannibal formed his men into a crescent, inviting the Romans in, baiting them with a shape that felt weak but was anything except that. And when the legions charged with a deafening roar of tens of thousands, the Carthaginian center bent and retreated like a trap welcoming its prey, letting the Romans push deeper and deeper until suddenly the crescent closed, the wings curled, and what was once open space snapped shut like a jaw made of steel and fury, choking 50,000 Romans in a ring of death. Dust rose, screams cut the air, horses crashed into bodies, and shields cracked under the weight of desperation as Rome realized that bravery was not enough when trapped in a perfect circle forged by genius. Men who had never known fear tasted it that day, and generals who had mocked Hannibal felt themselves shrinking in the shadow of a mind that moved armies like chess pieces, and the fields of Cannae became a graveyard that left Rome shaken to its core. Yet the empire did not collapse. Instead, Rome hardened, rebuilt, learned, evolved, and turned its wounds into warnings for future generations, vowing never again to underestimate the enemy, beginning a centuries-long transformation from sheer force into strategic precision. And the spark of that change would travel across time to battles far ahead. As decades rolled and the Republic twisted into an empire, another turning point rose at Actium in 31 BC, a battle fought not only with ships but with ambition, betrayal, and the fragile balance between love and power as Octavian faced Mark Antony and Cleopatra, two figures whose alliance threatened to split Rome in half. Triremes clashed on the sea, fire spread across the water like burning rivers, commanders shouted orders drowned out by the crash of oars, and the winds carried the scent of destruction while brave sailors fought to keep their vessels steady as political destiny played out above their heads. Antony's forces fractured Cleopatra's retreat, shattered morale, and Octavian emerged victorious, reshaping Rome from a republic fighting in the streets to an empire ruled by a single man, setting the stage for centuries of glory but also centuries of arrogance that would lead to its greatest mistakes. The empire that rose from Actium marched into the future with golden armor and unbreakable pride, expanding across continents, outlasting rebellions, crushing threats, and turning its legions into symbols of strength itself. Yet every empire has a moment where confidence becomes blindness, and Rome's moment arrived in 312 AD at Milvian Bridge, where Constantine faced Maxentus in a clash of not just armies but beliefs, visions, and divine signs. Soldiers on both sides stood trembling, shields held tightly, banners whipping in the wind as Rome once again prepared to redefine itself. And Constantine, driven by a mysterious vision, painted the Chiro on his soldiers' shields, telling them the heavens had chosen their victory. The armies collided with the thunder of destiny, and the bridge beneath them became a battleground of steel shouts and splintered hopes as Maxentus' forces broke the river, swallowing thousands, while Constantine emerged triumphant, shifting not just politics but the spiritual heart of the empire forever. Yet even this triumph carried a shadow into the future as Rome grew divided, older, slower, desperate to hold its borders against enemies who no longer feared the legions that once ruled the world, which leads to the final storm rising in the distance. The year 378 AD, when the earth trembled beneath the march of the Goths, fierce warriors who had been pushed, cornered, lied to, and treated as pawns until they no longer sought negotiation but vengeance, meeting the Roman army at Adrianople, where Emperor Valens, confident and misinformed, rushed into battle without waiting for reinforcements, believing old Roman confidence could defeat new barbarian ferocity. The sun beat down as legions took position, shields raised, spears ready, the memories of ancient glories whispering in their ears. Yet the Gothic cavalry erupted like thunder, smashing through Roman lines with the fury of a world tired of bowing to an empire that had grown complacent. Brave soldiers stood their ground, fighting shoulder to shoulder, refusing to break even as the enemy swarmed from every angle. But bravery was swallowed by chaos, and the Roman army, trapped and overwhelmed like at Cannae centuries earlier, collapsed under the weight of a disaster that shattered the empire's illusion of invincibility. Blood, dust, flames, and broken shields covered the field as Valens disappeared into the chaos. The legions fell in the thousands, and the echoes of this defeat would mark the beginning of the slow decline of the Western Roman Empire. And so the chain of battles that stretched from 216 BC to 378 AD told the story of an empire strengthened by genius, weakened by pride, reshaped by ambition, and humbled by the very tactics it once mastered, a saga of courage, competition, strategy, betrayal, evolution, and the unstoppable truth that no empire remains unchallenged forever. The centuries after Adrianople unfolded like a long bruise across the empire's skin as Rome staggered under the weight of exhaustion. Political cracks and enemies who sensed the weakening heartbeat of a giant that had once terrified the world, and yet even in decline there burned pockets of ferocity. Commanders who refused to accept fading glory, legions that still marched with defiant pride, and citizens who clung to the memory of an empire that once shaped continents with a single decree. From the smoking fields of 378 AD, survivors dragged themselves back behind crumbling walls, whispering of the Gothic cavalry's thunder and how the old discipline no longer frightened anyone. And inside the imperial court, panic twisted into infighting as generals accused each other. Advisors whispered poison, and young soldiers trained under captains who carried scars not just on their skin but deep in their faith in the empire. The Goths, once refugees begging for safety, now roamed like predators across Roman lands, their victories inspiring other tribes, Vandals and Huns and Franks who watched Rome stumbles like wolves waiting for a kill. Yet despite this chaos, there were still pockets where Rome fought like the Rome of old, and men whose names would never be written in marble still showed courage that could have stood beside the legends of Cannae or Actium. Along the Danube, small Roman garrisons held frostbitten outposts against raiding parties, their captains rallying soldiers who had grown up hearing stories of invincible legions. And even though the truth no longer matched the legends, their hearts still burned with that inherited pride, and they fought through snowstorms, hunger, and ambushes with the same stubborn bravery that Marcus Aurelius once praised. Many battles were small skirmishes. The world never recorded moments where 20 men held a wooden palisade against 100. Moments where a single scout rode miles through enemy territory to warn a frontier village. Moments where a dying soldier pressed his blood-soaked shield into a recruit's trembling hands and said, "Hold the line for Rome," even when he knew Rome no longer held the line for him. But the world outside the borders was changing faster than Rome could, shaped by new alliances, migrating tribes, and the violent ambitions of leaders who sensed opportunity in every Roman hesitation. Among them rose the Hun, fierce riders whose speed and savagery rippled like a storm cloud across the steppes, and even seasoned Roman veterans felt cold in their bones when hearing tales of horsemen who moved like ghosts and attacked with the precision of lightning. Meanwhile, deep within the empire's heart, fear fed corruption. As politicians clung to power, emperors rose and fell like passing shadows, and soldiers marched under banners that meant less with every passing year. Yet even in this darkness stood flashes of unmistakable Roman courage, moments where commanders rallied their men with fiery speeches calling upon the legacy of Milvian Bridge, invoking the discipline of Scipio's legions, reminding them that their ancestors faced worse and still carved victory from despair. One such commander, Flavius Stilicho, rose like a defiant flame, a half-Vandal general who fought with more loyalty to Rome than many Romans themselves, and he led armies that held back invading tides again and again, crushing Gothic uprisings, pushing back threats that would have shattered the empire sooner, teaching his soldiers to trust in strategy, resilience, and unity, even when their world seemed doomed. Under Stilicho, troops who had tasted defeat rediscovered discipline and determination, drilling in blazing heat and freezing rain, forging a brotherhood built not on the promise of imperial reward, but on the simple, stubborn belief that they could still defend their homeland. In these moments, the legions felt alive again, roaring with a strength that echoed long-forgotten victories, even though every victory brought only time, never peace. Yet jealousy and politics poisoned the empire from within, and just as Rome had once betrayed brilliant minds like Hannibal's enemies, now Rome betrayed its own savior. Stilicho, accused falsely of treason, was executed by the very empire he had saved, and his armies, leaderless and enraged, deserted, opening the doors to the next great tragedy. The Goths, led by Alaric, swept through a weakened empire like a storm unleashed, meeting Roman resistance that was brave but scattered, fierce but disorganized, and in every clash, brave men fell trying to stop the inevitable, their courage shining even as their empire dimmed. Villages burned, fortresses cracked, and soldiers fought street by street with a kind of desperation born not from orders but from the instinct to protect the land beneath their feet. They knew they were fighting not just enemies but time itself. And then came the unthinkable moment that generations feared but never believed would happen. The year 410 AD, when Rome, the eternal city, the heart of the world, for centuries felt the footsteps of foreign warriors marching through its gates. Yet even in this catastrophe, battle-hardened Roman defenders fought in alleyways, on rooftops, at bridges, and inside temples, showing the same bravery as those who stood at Cannae or Adrianople, refusing to let their city fall without resistance. Flames rose, shouts echoed through marble streets, and the once invincible symbol of civilization trembled. Yet those final defenders fought with hearts of iron until the last blade dulled and the last shield cracked. The fall of Rome was not just a defeat but a tragedy layered with courage, sacrifice, betrayal, and the stubborn spark of Roman pride that refused to die even when the city did. a spark that would travel forward into the next chapter, into new empires, into new wars, into the legacy that no collapse could erase. In the aftermath of Rome's fall, the world that rose from its ashes was a fractured landscape stitched together by memories of glory, scattered legions, and the stubborn pride that refused to vanish even when the empire itself had dissolved. And the men who once marched beneath the golden eagle found themselves serving new kings, new borders, and new destinies while still carrying the ghost of Rome in every scar across their armor. The Gothic warriors who once trembled before legions now walked the streets of the Eternal City with a mixture of triumph and disbelief. For even they knew that conquering Rome was not like conquering any other place. It felt like stepping into the mouth of history itself. Yet as they marched through marble roads, past broken statues and empty forums, many sensed that victory tasted strangely hollow, for an empire does not die in a single moment but in a slow fade of generations, pride, and decisions that no sword could undo. And so the world entered an age shaped by the echoes of Cannae Actium, Milvian Bridge, and Adrianople battles that had carved the fate of millions each, leaving behind lessons carried by soldiers, scribes, and storytellers who tried to understand how an empire so powerful could bend, then break, then scatter into the hands of tribes who once begged for its mercy. As new kingdoms rose across the West, the spirit of Roman warfare refused to vanish, and former legionaries taught their tactics to Franco-Germanic tribes, drilling them in formations, shield walls, discipline, and the art of marching, not as a mob but as a unified machine. The sons of barbarians learned Roman sword grips, Roman battle signals, Roman strategic thinking, and though they no longer fought for the Senate or the emperor, they carried the iron heartbeat of an empire that lived through them in ways they did not yet understand. Some of these soldiers wandered far from their homeland, traveling as mercenaries across collapsing territories, fighting in mountain passes, forest ambushes, frozen plains, and sun-scorched deserts, their loyalty bought with meals or silver rather than patriotism. Yet their bravery remained as fierce as ever, a lingering reminder of the discipline forged long before their time. Among them arose warriors who carried personal legends, men who claimed ancestors that fought at Cannae Fathers, who held the line at Milvian Bridge, brothers who fell at Adrianople, and they recited these tales around campfires to younger fighters who listened wide-eyed, imagining an empire of marble triumphs and golden legions, even though they themselves would never see it. Meanwhile, far to the east, the Eastern Roman Empire, the last torch of Roman power, burned brighter in defiance, refusing to crumble as the West had. Constantinople, the shining capital, stood like a fortress of stubborn hope, and its people rebuilt armies, renewed alliances, and swore to carry the Roman name into a new era even as the old world collapsed behind them. Their generals studied the same battles that shaped their ancestors, analyzing Hannibal's tactics, reviewing Octavian's choices at Actium, studying Constantine's bold strike at Milvian Bridge, and dissecting Valent's fatal mistakes at Adrianople, building strategies meant to ensure such disasters would never happen again. Yet the world they faced was fiercer, faster, and more unpredictable, filled with enemies who had studied Rome's greatest victories and weaknesses alike, using that knowledge to craft new forms of warfare that stretched the limits of bravery, intelligence, and survival. The Huns thundered across the steppe like a living storm, their arrows flying faster than commands could be given, their horses moving with unnatural speed. And even the Byzantine commanders who inherited Rome's legacy felt their confidence shake under the weight of this new threat. Still, they fought with a tenacity that rivaled their ancestors, adapting formations, reinforcing walls, using strategy where brute force failed, showing the world that Rome might have fallen in the West but its spirit was not yet extinguished. Soldiers who once patrolled Roman roads now guarded the walls of Constantinople, forging steel under new banners, fighting not just for land but for memory. And their courage inspired a new generation of leaders who believed that the Roman identity was not tied to geography but to resilience itself. Meanwhile, in the former Western territories, the rise of new kingdoms sparked conflicts that carried the DNA of Roman warfare. Battles filled with shield clashes, cavalry maneuvers, last stands, sudden betrayals, and moments of valor so intense they seemed to rise from the very soil where legions once marched. Across fields soaked in dew or blood, men fought under foreign flags but with Roman fire in their hearts, shaping a turbulent era that owed everything to the chain of battles between 216 BC and 378 AD. And through it all, storytellers, monks, and wandering veterans kept alive the memories of that ancient empire, whispering tales of bravery, rivalry, tactical genius, and the price of pride, teaching that the rise and fall of Rome was not simply history but a lesson carved into time, that no army is invincible, no empire eternal, but courage, strategy, loyalty, and legacy can outlive even the greatest wars. Even centuries later, when new empires rose and fell, every commander, every warrior, and every student of war would look back not just at Rome's victories but at its catastrophes, studying Hannibal's and Actium's turning point, Constantine's divine gamble, and Adrianople's fatal arrogance, understanding that these battles were more than events. They were warnings and inspirations that shaped the world long after the last Roman standard fell. And thus, the story of Rome's greatest battles lived on, not in marble statues or imperial decrees but in the courage of every soldier who fought knowing the odds in every strategy drawn from ancient wisdom, in every kingdom that carried the empire's shadow, proving that the saga from 216 BC to 378 AD did not end with a collapse but transformed into a legacy that would guide warriors for 1,000 years.